So this is my unit 2.4 on exercise physiology, adaptions of the body systems to long-term training. And firstly, for different events and demands, I chose to analyse Mark Noble as a football player. They may experience times of anaerobic activity, such as when they sprint to intercept the ball. And this would be anaerobic activity as they are working without oxygen. And you would usually see this for a short time, over a short duration, making it so the performer will have to work at a high intensity and exert around 90 to 95% of their maximal exertion. However, there will be times where a footballer will aerobically need to jog back into position to set up a fortified formation. This is aerobic activity, as no will use oxygen to jog back into position. Usually, aerobic events will be long duration, low intensity, as you won't be able to work anaerobically over such a prolonged amount of time. Over time, footballers may adapt their body systems, such as how aerobic activity may see Noble lower his resting heart rate and increase stroke volume and cardiac output. So aerobic training methods. Typically, if Noble wanted to increase his aerobic system, he could participate in training activities such as fit, frequency, intensity, time and type. That will increase, for example, his muscular endurance. He could participate in continuous training where he would continuously run over a minimum of 30 minutes. This would increase his cardiovascular system. However, this isn't suitable to Noble's sport. As in football, he won't actually be continuously running over 30 minutes, and this is why interval training may be more suitable. This is because interval training can allow for Noble to sprint over 10 to 15 metres and have a break where he may walk or slightly jog back to the start of the sprints. And he would do this 10 to 15 times. This is much more suitable, as Noble may find himself sprinting this short distance to intercept the ball, and then he may walk or lightly jog back into his position. Anaerobic training methods. Typically, if Noble wanted to increase his anaerobic performance, he would participate in HIIT training, which is high intensity interval training, as this will allow for him to work without oxygen. He could do interval training doing sprints of 30-35 meters so that he can test his speed whilst also increasing his anaerobic endurance. He could also do fartlek training doing these sprints on different terrain that would be like the pitch he plays on to create a more game-based situation. He could wear like boots as well. He wouldn't do a lot of these sprints as he needs to try to work with using as little oxygen as possible. So he may do around 5 to 8 sprints max. If Noble wanted to use fit, then he would less frequently do the sprints, as he won't be able to work without oxygen for long. He would work high intensity, as this is what sprinting requires. He would also do this over short periods of time, and of course do interval training. Although as Noble is a midfielder, he won't sprint around a lot in the match. He may need at times to break down a counter-attack. Cardiovascular adaptions. So VO2 max, the cardiovascular system links to aerobic performance, as you will consume oxygen constantly whilst you exercise, which will ultimately increase your VO2 max over time. This is important in anaerobic sports, as higher VO2 will mean that your muscles will gain oxygen they need to contract in sports such as football, when maybe Noble will need to kick the ball or shoot it towards goal, tackle, because he's working aerobically most of the time. And you can see the graph showing pre and post training. So before pre-season training, Noble's VO2 consumption may look like this, and look like the pre-line, and then post, when he started the season, that will be what it's like. It's a little bit lowered, but it can rise further than the pre-line could. So for the heart, for cardiovascular adaptions, there are many ways that the heart will create adaptions due to long-term training. This may be things such as cardiac hypertrophy. This is where the heart, being a muscle, will grow due to constant contraction, which tears the myocardium and then rebuilds with health and protein. This will mean the heart can contract faster for longer, which will also help increase stroke volume and cardiac output. Athlete's heart is, however, a syndrome where the heart is enlarged and the resting heart rate is lower than usual. This means that due to the heart being enlarged, because of cardiac hypertrophy. The resting heart rate is lower because it doesn't have to work as hard, and this is because the heart can contract hard enough to send enough blood to the muscles they need that need it. Usually an untrained heart would have a resting heart rate of around 75 beats per minute, whilst a trained heart would have a resting heart rate of 60 beats per minute. This is also because of how cardiac hypertrophy affects stroke volume, as because of the low resting heart rate, this allows for the ventricles to fill and for you to get a bigger end diastolic volume. And due to the heart being able to contract with more force, this will mean that blood leaving the ventricles will increase, therefore leading to a bigger stroke volume. This bigger stroke volume means that heart rate stays low due to how the bigger stroke volume means that enough blood is leaving the heart to energize the working muscles, and this backs up how athletes' heart means for a low resting heart rate. Cardiac hypertrophy will also see your max heart rate increase. An untrained max heart rate would be 180 beats per minute. However, a trained heart would see your max heart rate rise to around 200 beats per minute, which will allow for blood to be distributed quicker and when your muscles need it, which means the athlete can perform for longer. The next slide will show a graph showing the relationship between heart rate and stroke volume due to the stroke volume adaptions. Heart rate range is important when performing because it is the range in between a performer's resting heart rate and their max heart rate. If a performer had a low resting heart rate than another, then it would mean that the performer with the lower resting heart rate would hit the max heart rate slower, which would mean that they can work at a better standard for longer. So that could help Noble, especially in midfield. He wants to be able to keep working at his max for as long as possible, whilst others fatigue. It will give him a good benefit during his performance. So here is the graph, which shows heart rate pre-long-term training and post-long-term training. The line representing pre-long-term training shows a constantly higher heart rate than the post-long-term training line. This is due to how cardiac hypertrophy leads to an increase in stroke volume, which ultimately means that the heart rate doesn't need to be high because the working muscles are getting enough oxygen from the blood, and the heart's adaptions will also affect cardiac output due to how the increase in stroke volume will see more blood be ejected from the heart. However, due to this increase in stroke volume that sees heart rate go down, this will also mean that cardiac output will be decreased more than if heart rate was as higher, as the heart would be pumping out more blood even with a high stroke volume. However, this doesn't work out, and an increase in stroke volume can only see a decrease in heart rate. Heart rate cannot increase. The increase in VO2 max. I don't know what I'm talking about there, but for blood can adapt with long-term training with adaptations such as capillarization, where there is an increase in capillaries which will become useful as this makes for extra transport for blood to be carried to the muscles. Capillarization will also help diffusion rates increase as there are more capillaries to carry carbon dioxide to the alveoli where it can be diffused, and the capillaries can then take on oxygen. Long-term training can also increase the number of red blood cells, hematocrit and hemoglobin levels, which is important when delivering oxygen. The more red blood cells there are, then the more oxygen can be transported, especially if there's also more hemoglobin to latch onto the oxygen and keep it in the red blood cell. This means that there will be a higher ratio of blood cells to blood volume, increasing the hematocrit level. Long-term training, however, can increase blood volume by 20%, which means that there will be more red blood cells in that blood to carry on oxygen to muscles. The higher volume also means that there will be a more constant supply of oxygen as there is bigger influx of blood and the extra plasma can carry the red blood cells efficiently. Exercise in long term can also mean that blood viscosity is reduced and isn't as thick and sticky as pre-long-term trained athlete. The reduced viscosity means that the blood is less likely to become clotted in the arteries, which can mean for high blood pressure and bursting vessels as the blood can't get through. For health, aerobic endurance can also drastically improve your health as it will reduce the chances of diseases such as coronary heart disease, arteriosclerosis, atherosclerosis, and hypertension. And this is because you're working aerobically, your heart will need to work, which means that blood is constantly being pushed through the arteries, which means that there cannot be any build-up of fatty substances which may block the arteries. The build-up may increase blood pressure due to how the blood is clotted and the lumen has shrunk, so more blood is being pumped into the arteries and what then can actually move through the arteries. Cardiovascular system adaptions. The cardiovascular system will not majority adapt to the use of anaerobic training due to how you do not use oxygen and therefore the use of the heart isn't necessary. However, taking part in interval training where you may do 10 to 15 meter sprints may see improvements as you may jog back to the start of the sprints again. Means you're using your heart to distribute blood and oxygen to the working muscles. So during recovery, it may help aerobically. This may see cardiac hypertrophy due to how the sprints would work anaerobically, which will put the pressure on your heart. But then as you jog back during the recovery, you'll work aerobically. Cardiac output would increase because when you start working aerobically, you will see an increase in your output as you need to get blood to your working muscles that have been starved during those sprints. And then capillarization may also occur when taking part in interval training. But this would only take place during the aerobic side to it, or the recovery side. And this would be beneficial to Mark Noble, as with cardiac hypertrophy, this will lead to a higher stroke volume and higher cardiac output, which will mean that his muscles receive more oxygen than usual, so that he may perform to a better standard for longer. Capillarization will help Noble's recovery as able to diffuse the CO2 his muscles have created and make the hemoglobin more available to receive oxygen to take to the muscles.